Can't Towney sing this song, doo-da, doo-da. Canton corruption all day long, oh doo-da day. That goddamn song's been stuck in my head all week. Whose harebrained idea was it to come up with a jingle? Anyway, if you didn't catch the live stream today, I just wanted to apologise again for going dark on you, and most of you know why I went dark. The bottom line is I just had to put my head down and bum up and get these drawings done. So at the other end of it, I think we're up to 80 pages. Not all of it I drew myself. Some of it's the engineering drawings and so on. I really can't be bothered listing it all right now. More importantly, I wanted to shout out a big thank you to everyone who bought me a box of nails. Although it'll all be screws because it's all steel construction. But after the customs bill came in, holy henna, every cent counts right now. I knew it was adding up because the days were turning into weeks. But when the final bill came in, oh my god, it gave me a migraine. Not to worry though. We're not in a hurry to move in, so it's just going to have to sit in a shipping container on the block waiting for us to get to it. I think the council even wants a permit for that, but I understand there is a little bit of grace if it's storing your building materials. We'll see how that goes. I just wanted to be sure to thank everybody who purchased memberships, shouted memberships, donated through the GoFundMe. It was all wonderfully useful and I appreciate every single one of you. I'll try to make sure I have a camera handy on site so that I can keep you updated on the build progress, but that's just not going to happen for like months. Anyway, let's get on with this video. During our live stream today, Abby inspired me to pull my finger out and try to reproduce these artifacts that we saw in the Sallyport video. I've said this numerous times now that I have been able to reproduce those in the past, but I was having trouble getting modern software with the newer algorithms to generate the artifacts the way the older software used to do. Well, that's what I thought the problem was, but it turns out that my knowledge of transcoding and encoding video formats has improved vastly since then. I just couldn't remember how to do it the wrong way. So essentially it involves over-compressing the video and then transcoding it back into an unusable format. Fortunately for you guys, I found a great demonstrator video that explains exactly what's happening during that process. Those ghostly artifacts are most widely known as a compression glitch, and they generally come about from over-compressing a video or trying to make the file size way too small. This causes the algorithm to have to drop way too much data, and more often than not causes data errors. As ubiquitous nuisances, such glitches are regarded as seemingly random image distortions. But each glitch offers a glimpse into the mechanism of video compression. Looking more closely, we can see these squares are examples of motion blocking, an artifact of digital compression's reorganization of the image. But note, however, we weren't seeing the Sallyport videos close up. We were seeing them from a distance. So if there was any blocking, there's no way we would have seen it from that distance. And we can be sure that it is present in the original video because that's how compression algorithms break down the image into clusters of macro blocks. Compression doesn't just break down a single frame into simpler parts, but it also simplifies the movement from frame to frame. And this is why we see it impacting the things that are moving in the screen and not necessarily things that are not moving in the background. Video compression breaks up the original source footage into iframes and p-frames. An iframe is an intra-coded picture and a p-frame is a predicted picture. The p-frame is predicting what's coming up in the next set of frames. The iframe is the keyframe. If you've ever fiddled around with GIF animations or GIF, whichever way you want to call it, then you'll be familiar with those terms. There's the keyframe, and then there's the frames in between that create the movement. So the keyframe, or the iframe, is identical to the original source frame. It reproduces the entirety of the visual data, and it is essentially a still frame or a still photograph. The P frame is the instruction for how to change the frame from the original previous frame. So in this small loop of P frames, only so much of the image is not changing from frame to frame. The background, for example, is still, so it's not changing between the frames, and therefore the P frame's motion instructions don't include the still items or background. Only the parts of the frame that are moving are registered as data in the P frame, in this case just the foreground. There's also some parts of the foreground that don't move, they remain unchanged from frame to frame. We'll see this later in the Sallyport video. P frames are primarily used to save data so that the final file is smaller. So things that don't move don't necessarily need to be instructed, and things that do move are the things that contain the instructions. When you have a change of scenery or a change of motion, a keyframe with the full quality source image will be placed in between the P frames. It's when a keyframe or the iframe fails to reset the image that causes the ghostly shadows or the glitches that we see. Without the keyframe in between with the higher quality image, the P frames will bleed into each other, and it's that bleeding effect that creates the ghostly images or the artifacts. In this example, we're looking at a visualization of a P frame's motion instructions, and you'll remember that the P stands for prediction. The arrows predict the curvilinear sweep of the subject's downward movement, as well as the motion created by the camera pan to the right, and the lack of movement to the left of the frame. When that single P frame is repeated over and over again without a keyframe in between, or an iframe, the actual motion instructions or the data itself is what we can see. This is a very extreme example, and what we saw in the Sallyport footage was definitely more subtle, although I do wonder if looking at it much closer it's more obvious. And so it's these curvilinear sweeps of movement that are now etched into the image as the ghost. Like a chronophotograph, the compression glitch gives us an abstraction of movement in the visual form. That is, the movement itself is abstracted from the moving image. So essentially, if the glitch reveals video compression's reconstruction of every single camera movement and every cut in the video, because that's how the algorithm works, then we can safely assume that there was no camera movement, but there were cuts in the Sallyport video. It's essentially the same as a new scene in a movie, where the predictive frames have been separated from the iframe, and new moving objects that were not predicted suddenly appear, and then the P frames bleed together. Video compression isn't just used in cases where we want smaller files to save room on our hard drives and thus store more movies. It's also used in streaming, or low quality streaming. If we go back in time 20 years or so, when we didn't have super fast internet and we were just using slowpoke old modems, video compression was particularly valuable. In the world of movies at least, certainly not in the world of broadcasting. It's only since we've developed and improved the hardware that digital broadcasting has been embraced by the media world. Here's a small demonstration of what I'm talking about.
So what I've got here on our touchscreen monitor is a video using H.264 compression. As you can see, using a robust infrastructure like Category 6 or 6A, where you don't have any errors, you can see that the video stream is basically transmitting seamlessly through the network. So what I want to do is show the impact of a poor infrastructure, in this case a minimally compliant Cat5e infrastructure, and the impact of errors on the video stream. So I'm going to just simply switch the Category 6A system with a Cat5e system. And with our setup, again, it's running at worst case conditions at 100 meters. What you'll see here, once the video stream comes up, is an error rate of roughly 0.89 to 1%. So that's a very low error rate, but you can see in terms of the video, it's pretty much unusable. So this is really showing the impact of compression and errors on the network. So really the rule of thumb that you want to use is if you're specifying high compression video schemes like H.264 on your network, you want to provision a very robust infrastructure for that application.
Alright, so that's not deliberate compression, but it essentially is resulting in the same thing. When it's not deliberate, we would call it data loss, which is generally measured by error rate. And there's an important distinction because in a deliberate compression, you're choosing to compress a file. You can choose the size of the file you want to end up with, and you can choose some of the parameters that you are compressing it with. In a low quality streaming situation, you don't get to choose which packets of data are being dropped, and you have little control over the eventual outcome. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Sallyport videos. We're not seeing the absolute chaos that an error rate might cause. We're seeing a much more subtle, controlled compression that I'm guessing was supposed to be a lot less obvious than it actually was. So let's just have a closer look at the Sallyport video before I show you what I've produced. So if we just play this through a little, you'll see when this guy walks over here, right there, do you see that blockiness? And he splits into two. Well, that blockiness is what we call motion blocking. It's not blocking it as in you can't see it, it's blocking it as in turning it into blocks of colour. So let's watch a little further. So right there you see there are definitely some frames dropped, but the fact that we didn't see any ghostly apparitions when those frames were dropped indicates that their iframes were actually retained and the P frames on either side were still able to predict the next movement. Over the next couple of seconds, we don't see any motion blocking at all, it's just really blurry. And if all of these ghostly apparitions that we saw in the rest of the footage were a result of the camera switching itself on and off, which Abby and I have clearly proven is not the case, then they must be a result of some type of compression. And the fact that this part of the video has none of those ghostly apparitions indicates that this part of the video was not compressed that way, more likely deliberately blurred. Now I'm going to take this very same bit of footage that we just looked at and I'm going to create data errors so you can see the difference. Also note that because it's errors, it's not as controlled and subtle as what we saw in other parts of this footage. Also worth noting, I had to screen record this because one piece of software or one media player is giving me a warning and saying, look, we can fix this, and I've opted out. Whereas if I threw it into iMovie, for example, it's just going to fix it all automatically without giving me any choices. So I didn't want it fixed, I want you to be able to see the errors. And that's probably one of the most obvious improvements in the algorithms that we have today versus 20 years ago. The fact that they can actually fix it to a certain degree. Something else that's worth noting is that sometimes when the movement in the foreground is moving past things in the background, they seem to blend together a little bit, or a lot in this case, because it wasn't deliberate. I actually think that what Microdots pointed out in his video, where it looks like the tail light ends up in front of his arm rather than behind it, I actually do think that that is P-frame bleed. Because, like I said, if you have some control or more control over the compression process, you can make it appear less obvious or more subtle. but you still can't control where the iframes are getting dropped and the p frames are getting repeated over and over. Not in a straight out compression algorithm, but there is a way that you can manually copy p frames and paste them one after the other as consecutive frames and create these issues in a very deliberate manner. In After Effects, it's called Datamoshing. And it's exactly that I was playing with when I accidentally transcoded a file into an unusable format, thus producing unintended errors. This whole Datamoshing scenario is actually quite funny because we just left an era of technology that created this visualization accidentally, and it's something that we didn't want, and we've moved into an era where we don't have that issue as much as we did, and now everybody wants it. Well, not everybody, but I've seen it mostly in music videos, but there are some YouTube creators who are also using it for special effects. But here's the funniest thing of all. It's bloody hard to produce, like when you're trying to do it deliberately. Because you don't want those iframes to be non-existent. That's exactly what will cause a video player to say, yeah, no, there's something wrong with this file. So yeah, it's pretty tricky business keeping your iframes and then producing this repetitive p-frame effect and not corrupting your file while you're doing it. So this little demonstration here, this is just a random seed mosh. So it just picks a random number, but you could type one in if you wanted to, and it will mosh it randomly, essentially. If I put the video in there and then I press the mosh it button, it moshes it. But you have no control. Like, I guess you could play with the seeding a little bit more to vary the moshing, but as you can see, you're not really getting a choice in where you put anything, like if it's a particular P frame that you want to copy and paste. But I do have an example of that. Although I don't mind admitting I haven't really mastered this yet, so I'm just going to show you someone else doing it for now, till I work out how to do it myself. So this chap's name is Sean Ray Edits, and he's going to show you how to do P-frame data moshing deliberately.
If you haven't already watched my iframe data moshing video, I would recommend going back and watching that first. I'll leave a link for it in the description. P-frame data moshing is where we copy and paste a P-frame to duplicate over itself. In doing so, we're replicating whatever movement data is happening within a frame and applying it to the previous frame that we've selected. If you're watching this video, you might have seen some examples of P-frame data moshing, like this one, or this one. Tutorial video. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make this exact effect. So let's get into the video. To begin with, we need to export the video as a H.264 file. We can do this in pretty much any video editor. I just happen to be using Final Cut today. Now that we have our clip as a H.264 file, we need to bring it into a Vidimux. When you drop the clip into a Vidimux, you're going to get two pop-ups, and you just need to say no to both of them. Now that we have the footage in a Vidimux, we need to change the file type to an MPEG-4 ASP in brackets XVID. This is going to allow us to begin the P-frame data moshing process. Next, we need to go to Configure, move over to the frame type, and change the maximum iframe interval to all 9s. Once you've done this, hit OK, and then we need to save the video. Once you've saved this first pass through, you need to close the file and then reopen it again. Now that we've reopened our file, we need to find a frame that we want to use to duplicate. Make sure you check along the bottom that it says that it's a frame type P. Once we've found the frame we want to duplicate, we need to push the A button, then use our arrow keys to move across a frame and press the B button to select this singular frame. Once you've selected it, using Command or Control C, copy and paste the frame. I'm going to do about 20 to 30 copies of this frame so the effect lasts for about half a second. Now that we've copy and pasted the frame, we need to change the file type back to a copy. So go back to your video tab and select copy. Once we've done this, all we need to do is just save the video now. And that's everything we need to do in a Vidimux.
Here Johnny!
You can take this clip and re-export it and reprocess it through the P-frame datamoshing process as well to get even more funky results.
Here's Johnny!
Now, I know what you're thinking. It looks easy as, but unfortunately, the developers of the WhoDunnit software have changed the configuration of the panels that Sean is showing us, so it's not quite as straightforward as he makes it look. Nonetheless, you can see that it's doable, and there's 1,001 different tutorials on YouTube on learning how to do it, using everything from paid software, which is mostly the option, to free software, where you get very little choice in the outcome. But anyway, that brings us to the end of my video. I just wanted to show you that this datamoshing thing is a thing, and it's popular with the young folk, isn't it, Colin? And finally, between Abby and I and all of our experiments, what we saw in the Sallyport footage was not accidental. It was all deliberate. No matter which way it was done, it was all deliberate and done in a controlled environment by someone who actually knows what they're doing. I dare say we will be following up on a live stream with Abby on this topic, because this is more down her alley than it is mine. But anyway, that's it for today. Cheerio!